Hey, everybody, I'm Jack with Future Pastimes, and this is Battle Language. We're going to have a roundtable discussion about the Ixian faction in Dune. So, this is one of the factions from the first expansion in the Gale Force 9 edition. And we're going to talk about the pros and cons, the strengths, the weaknesses, how to play them, how to play against them, looking at each of the advantages. I'm joined by an esteemed panel of the guys who've been playtesting a lot of the expansions as well as other stuff from Future Pastimes. We have with us today Mellister, GJ, and Mr. Nobody. And they love Dune. They've played a lot of it, and they have opinions. And we're going to hear from them as we dive into the Ixian faction. So this is, it's by and large, it's characters from House Vernius. And a lot of this lore is pulled from the prequel books, and a lot of what the faction does is also drawn from those prequel stories. In general, the Ixians are known for their renowned for their technology, and their technology. What technology does exist in the Dune universe, by and large, comes from Planet Ix under the stewardship of the Ixians, who are ruled by House Vernius. And we're gonna take a look at what they do and the leaders and whatnot. And I'll start off by they've got two different types of forces. They've starred forces, which work like starred forces do in the other factions. They're double strength. They're cyborgs. They have more of them than the others. That would be the Fremen Fedaykin and the Emperor Sardaukar. But then their other forces, their remaining 13 forces, are suboids, who are not quite up to the task. They're only half strength. And they do start on the planet in their own stronghold. It's an extra stronghold that gets added to the game. It is a hidden stronghold, so it's very difficult for the other factions to get into it. They certainly can't ship directly to it. They can move into it. So it's not like they don't know where it is. It's clearly pointing at where it is. If it's there, if it's like I'm in Wind Pass in this sector, that's what the little pointy part of the token is there to show you. And it's mobile, so it can move around, which is not to say that it's a giant Roomba. I like to, it's not moving around. It's like a MASH unit. That was the idea, at least for some of us at Future Pastimes. At one point, it was a floating stronghold that moved with the storm. The storm moved 3 sectors. This would move 3 sectors. But it seemed a little bit absurd, especially because it was not based on anything in the book. In fact, the fact that it's mobile at all is a little bit of a stretch, but it's one I think we're all living with. But I will now open it up to the panel to get some insights from them about this, and then we can go advantage by advantage. But let's just start with some general impressions from the team. And we're also now, I believe, joined by Jaded, who is a normal participant in our battle languages. So I'm sure we'll get his 2 cents as well. So what do you guys? Let's talk about the Ixians and where they sort of stand in your estimation, ranking amongst the factions.
I,
Um,
I think before we opened the recording, we kind of agreed that Texans are weird, and that's probably the most concise description you can have of them. They do a lot. They do nothing. They are weird with their forces. Are really strong. Some are really terrible. They have another Roomba that they can move around and scoop up spies with. They have good leaders. That's probably the most stable thing. These leaders are really solid. That's
their
probably
their
the
their
most.
their
We just
their, their, their one defining characteristic is that they destroy Atreides.
Yeah.
Like if you like my advice, never put Atreides and Ixians in the same game if you have a choice, because both sides will hate each other, or even worse, they will love each other and start working together, and then the rest of the board won't have any fun.
Well, there's a lot of factions that I think kind of can be described similarly. They hate each other unless they're in an alliance, and then they're like, "Wow, isn't this great?" And everyone else is like, "Oh, I can't stand that they're in an alliance together." But yeah, they definitely, which is interesting because lore-wise, there was always a pretty decent connection between the Atreides and the Ixians, at least until um, after the events of Dune. Then the relationship kind of fell apart. But yeah, it is a weird faction, and I think this is one that Bill Eberly had the most input in. He had read these prequel books first, and a lot of the elements captured his imagination. He liked the idea of the suboids. He was intrigued by the idea of Prince Romber being a cyborg and then sort of capitalizing on cyborgness as a thing. So even though, yeah, he's really the only Ixian cyborg, lore-wise. It wasn't like, hey, this is great. Let's start converting all of our populace into cyborgs. That's not a thing. So it's a very strange faction for
Yeah.
those reasons. My contributions were largely centered around the technology elements. So the little bit of the starting game, although that was a group effort, but the bidding advantage was my, and then the technology advantage. So I was trying to center the faction advantages around the idea of technology, since a that was a very generally accepted. And if anybody had described what are the Ixians, they're all about technology. That's their thing. They're skirting the lines of the Great Convention, and dancing right up to, would this be a violation of the Great Convention? There are probably some houses that think so, but not everyone, especially those who want to take advantage of it. So I was trying to get that kind of atmosphere on there, but Bill was like, "Oh, let's do this. It's fun." And that was that was the real thing, is if anybody else was like, "Yeah, this is fun," then it was going into the faction. So that was how that kind of developed. Um, who else? I know that the rest of you have some thoughts too. Before we get into the specifics, we'll really drill down on the advantages, but just some impressions and your first impressions, and then after playing it for a while. I know that there's some trends, but I wanted to let you guys get into it.
Yeah.
They're
I
really
know. Go ahead. Go ahead, Jay.
they're really interesting in terms of strength. Like if you know how to use those abilities, they're like busted. But if you don't know how, they seem like the worst faction in the game. And I think of all the factions, they're the ones where you see people really strong, they're too powerful, they're the best. And you also have people saying the worst faction in the game, can't do anything with them.
They have this Harkonnen sink or swim problem where if you have a good Harkonnen game, it feels unstoppable. The same with the Ixians. It feels unstoppable, but if you lose that one decisive battle, it will be very hard for you to regain that power.
I know that whenever I first played them, uh, they were like kind of confusing to me, which is kind of how I knew that they were going to be really strong. Because I was like, wait a second, there's things on this paper that aren't like emergently obvious, like why this is good, and I'm like, this has got to be good because I remember reading it and thinking like, well, let me look at these purple guys. And I think it's funny you had mentioned that they're like kind of right on that line of like, hey, are we crossing any lines as far as the great conventions go? And then they're also released with the Talaxu, who are like, hey, should these guys really be pumping out, golas in this fashion? It's fine, I'm sure. Like it's technically they're not breaking any of the rules. Um, but yeah, I remember when I first played them, it was just a little confusing. And when I looked at their leader spread, I was like, oh, this is just House Atreides. And I was like, but they don't have the Kwisatz Haderach, so I'm not sure how this is going to go. And then as time has gone on, I'm like, they're really interesting. And I do kind of echo what Malister says. I think you can kind of bounce back. I think the Harkonnen's a fair comparison because I think that so like if you have a bad turn, you're in the tanks, you've lost some cards, if you can get some spice and start getting some of those cards, which we'll kind of cover when we hit those advantages, I really think you can start to either feed the market bad enough cards that you can land on something to catch back up, or if you hit those bad cards in the market, you're able to kind of cycle through those quick enough to grab some of the good stuff that's potentially out there for bidding. So they're kind of this, yeah, sort of razor's edge kind of faction.
Yeah, they're not totally without agency when they do have a setback, but how quickly they can come back does depend on aligning some of the stars, and a lot of that will center around whether or not they're in control of their mobile stronghold here. If they lose this, then fighting back is going to be a longer process for them, because they can't always employ the mobile stronghold to get that bonus spice. So it's very hit and miss with that. You've got to, it helps if there's double spice blows out there. It helps if people are either fighting over it to the point where they are not able to collect it all, or they're distracted, or you're able to deter them or make deals. But every once in a while you get a fat windfall. You're like, oh, I just picked up 10 spice or 12 spice or something like that. Especially if you're like, oh, there's a spice blow here and one there, and I can just go whoop, 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 and get both of them. But that's more of the exception than it is the rule. You're not getting a huge windfall from that very often. Maybe once per game. Maybe if you're really lucky, a couple of times you'll get something out of it. If you've got the Karama, then that's a nice way to really take advantage of the board state and just screw everybody. But that's once per game that you're going to be able to do that. But if they don't have this, then it's nice to have a stronghold, to start with a stronghold, even though it doesn't give you an income. But it's also, especially if you're able to stick it somewhere where people are like, it's too much trouble to go down there and harass you. Because then people, they forget about that. They forget that you're already in a stronghold. You just need 2 more. And they can be very strong early in the game. And so that's something
The
that
HMS. People only have to have it happen to them once, and they'll never forget
yeah.
that anymore.
So yeah, let's go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, to echo your sentiment about what you just said about them picking up the spice. Yeah, I mean, I agree. The better you get at the game, typically the more negotiation you'll have. But I can say, like, when I first started playing with the group that I had, you may have 2 or 3 factions piling up on several different spice blows, and they just like basically kill each other to the man, or only leave 1 or 2 guys. And then when you're going through there, you're still sweeping up, 6 to 12 spice, and everyone's just like, wait a minute, like, we shouldn't be killing ourselves. Like, this guy's like getting rich and we're sending our guys to the tanks. Like, maybe we should reconsider this. So yeah,
Or
I think if you pay attention to the board, and if you're dealing with players who are like very aggressive, you can kind of sneak in there. But yeah, you're probably only gonna get to do that once or twice, and then they'll be like, okay, guys, like, we can't
but
just.
I think you guys are not looking at it right. You're looking for a passive view where you are hanging out in HMS, waiting for the opportunity to collect spice. You also have the reverse, where you can aggressively go for spice within range of the HMS, and you don't have to risk all your forces, because you can leave forces in the HMS that actually collect that spice, and you
Yeah,
only need to send out forces enough to beat everybody that's there.
right.
Yeah.
So
We'll get into that a
every
little
other
bit more too as we look at some of this stuff. So I'm
Mhm.
going to knock this off. So they start with 6 forces. 3 of them are cyborgs, 3 suboids in the HMS, and they start with 10 spice, which is pretty good. So this is in terms of initial board state. They're pretty close to Harkonnen and Atreides. They're in a stronghold. They've got 10 spice. They have 4 fewer forces, but in terms of fighting strength, it's a little bit closer. It's 6, 7.5, and so it's a little bit better in strength. Their free revival is only 1, but it can be a cyborg or a suboid. And an important note about this is they're the one faction with starred forces that doesn't have a limitation for reviving them. So the Fremen can only revive 1 Fedaykin per turn, and they can't pay to get more out. Same thing with the Emperor. Cyborgs, they can get more out. They cost more. But if you've got something like the Gola card, yeah, you can get all cyborgs out if you want. If you're allied to the Fremen, you can get that 3 free revival of, boom, all cyborgs. And so that can be an important element as well. And to note, you're placing this, you're placing it after the first storm, before the first spice blow or spice blows come up. And it's pretty common for somebody to start the game in sort of down here or somewhere else that's a little bit difficult to get to with ornithopters. But even if you're like, yeah, I'm starting here, because remember, this is a territory that is inside this territory. So if you've got thopters from Carthag, you got 1, 2, 3 gets you to Windpass, but it doesn't get you into this stronghold from there. So it's not insurmountable for the other factions, because of course they can always spend double to ship into here and then move in. But it's costly, and if the guild's not in the game, even the guild aren't necessarily anxious to go in and take over it. Not everybody starts the game with a great Ixian trader and is ready to go in with one force and wipe everybody out that way. It does happen, and it's very dramatic. But yeah, it's you're starting there, and then after the first turn, you're going to be able to move the stronghold 3 territories before the storm. So it's after the storm, turn 1, before the storm for the rest of the game. I go A, B, A for after, B for before. That's how I remember. And it's, where you place it. So if you're like, yeah, I'm starting here, you're relatively close to 4 spice blows right here. If you start somewhere like here, you're close to 4 spice blows. So there's some strategy, and let's talk to the panel. Like, where do you guys like to start if you're playing the Ixians, or if you're in what's your favorite sector and territory for placement?
It's basically where a person places the HMS tells you a lot of info about that person. Like one of the things you haven't mentioned is, well, you did mention it's sort of, but this counts as a stronghold, so you only need 2 more. Now, how do you win turn 1 with the Ixians? Is the question. If you put it somewhere here in Sulago South, you have to do basically the Harkonnen thing, where you or the you have to go to Carthag, then you have to go Carthag, Arakeen, and Carthag Siege the Bar to win the game. However, the aggressive Ixian player places it near Habanya or near Tuix, and then all they have to do on their turn is move their forces into the siege, ship to another siege, and suddenly you have a really aggressive turn 1 move. That's the aggressive Ixians player.
Yeah.
And when it is, I don't know if you've ever done this. Has anybody ever done this as the Ixians?
Oh yeah,
I
all the time.
1000% have.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I actually like
It will-
doing it here in Tuix if the guild is in the game, and especially if you're going early, because you can go walk in, and then now the guild is blocking that stronghold from everyone else until it's their turn, whenever they choose to take it, which kind of protects your HMS a little bit, because then they can't
Mhm.
ship into Tuix for cheap and then walk in.
Yeah, and really
I
only
Another
don't
dirty
like
one.
only these
I don't
factions
like
could
this
do that
spot
too.
because it's close
Yeah.
to the Fremen. Because this spawning from south, they can go 1, 2.
Yeah, of course
Another
depends.
another another dirty one you can do is you can start like up here, like Red Chasm, because they
No.
need to be 3. It's literally one of these 2. But if you move, like for example, like let's say that you're last in the storm order and nobody's necessarily blocking strongholds, you can ship in here wherever they're weak, and then take some of your guys and move them over here. Because
Interesting.
you'll be
Interesting.
close.
That's
Yeah,
not.
because you'll be close enough, and it also gives you protection because the Freeman can't walk into your stronghold. And it also means that like you can like if everyone's moved and you're like, okay, well I can't win. You can maybe ship into one of these places and then maybe walk out and go get some spice or
Mhm.
something like that. So it does give you some flexibility. It does kind of project that if you want to come here, you're going to have to end up in one of these two, but it is an option. So you don't necessarily have to put yourself in arm's reach of the Fremen, because that is kind of an Achilles heel, which is like, you could have, a crazed Fremen player, and he's like, all right, guys, I'm going to take all my forces and I'm going to pile them up. But like, if we move this guy back here, they might be like, hey, we're just going to pile up on the wall and we're going to go visit these guys. And it's like, they probably have enough forces that even with your really good starting card, that you might not be able to beat them, dial everything, and still have guys left over. And it's
Yep.
like Jack just said, if you're out of here, it could be a kind of a big problem for you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I agree because one thing, you only start with 6 forces in the strongholds, and the way the cyborgs and the subs work, you can only dial, what is it, 9.5 now? What is it, 6 plus
7.5.
1.5? Yeah, so
It's
eight and a
7.5.
half,
Yeah.
7.5. So a full stack of 10 Fremen, depending on how they divided their Verdiking, that can be 13. So 13 for seven
Yeah.
and a half. You know,
It's
Aaron
it's
can win
tough.
that.
Yeah. Yeah, if there's no Fremen, I really like just starting here.
Yeah.
Oh
Like,
yeah,
Yeah.
it's
not
close to
having
spice,
Fremen.
lots of spice. You get close to this if you want to. For the same reason, Red Chasm is a good option. You can run away and then move it to other safer places. It's just a good spot. It's also
Yeah.
like if somehow you got lucky and got Habania Siege as well, next turn the storm is blocked. Now you have 2 strongholds and no one can touch. Which,
Right.
it's pretty good.
That's true. And realistically, I mean, like the bottom of the board has like so many good
Yeah.
areas for high value spice that people have to go out of their way to try to get. Where with the luxury of this thing, you can just kind of scoot your way over and grab
Yep.
some of it up.
Mhm.
And
The other
Malister said something. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Just if in case Fremen are there, I just like the depression for that reason. Because if Fremen want to come here, they are forced to go to a really awkward place, and they are just not going to end up getting spice at all, ever. They have to ship
Yeah.
and move to do both things to get to me. Selago Depression is just a good spot. It's far away from everything. Good spice flows around. I can still reach the sink if I need to. I'm just
Yeah.
flexible later on to move around when I need to.
Malister alluded to something earlier. This may not have specifically been what he's talking about, but let's say for the sake of argument that you've got these guys here, and let's say somebody moved over to this spice blow, you could just, or I'm sorry, I need to be a little closer. Let me move the stronghold. Let's say you're here. You could just move some of your guys out to go fight them and just dial your forces. And then before the storm moves, you could just come over here and then scoop up the rest of the spice your forces didn't collect.
Yeah. And that's the mother load there, the 12 spice blow, which a lot of times, even if somebody does go out there, they're not able to get it all. So it's nice to get something out of it. Let's take a look at the first advantage. So they have a start of game one. So before treachery cards are dealt, you're drawing all the cards for the factions, and they're getting to look at them, and they're getting to choose the one that they want to start with. So that is their advantage with being the providers of the technology for the whole Imperium, is they have the pick of the litter there. Then the rest of the cards are going to be shuffled up, and they're going to deal those out without knowing who has what specifically, but they do know what's out there, and this is a big deal. So if we've got a situation like this, where wow, look at this, 2 worthless cards, 2 green cards, 1 defense, and a weapon that doesn't block it. So if this is your initial draw here, do you say, all right, I've got the only weapon, or do you say I have the only defense, and you're looking at later on, you have another advantage, which is the next one down the list, where you can maybe reinforce this. So this can be a very big deal. If you go with the weapon, that nobody can stop you in a battle initially, and then you're looking at. We might as well look at the next advantage. So the bidding one is because you're going to get to a bidding phase pretty quickly in that turn. You're going to look at one more card than can be bought that turn. So here they're secretly looking at this, and now you've got there's a lot more going on. So and you're going to choose a card to suppress. So they could say, well, if I've got the only weapon here, here's the only defense for it, the shield. I can say this shield is not going to be part of this auction, and you're either going to put this on top of the deck or at the bottom of the deck, but it just won't be in the up for bid. The rest of these cards would be shuffled. So now you know. All right. Knowing this, you might go with that, saying there's going to be 3 more weapons up there, and so maybe you do try to buy one of these cards, especially if you're like, all right, if I get one of these 2 weapons, again, there's no defense for that. If I get this, I know somebody's got a snooper out there. So maybe this is the card you suppress to get the shield out there. It's some interesting decisions. And then if you're playing advanced, you've got one more trick up your sleeve, which again, we'll go ahead and talk about that too. It's the technology one. So if you do this and the one card you end up buying is this one, well, you're not necessarily stuck with it, because what'll happen is, let's say this is the 3rd card up for bid. You've bought it. Before the next card goes up for bid, you can say, oh, I'm doing my technology advantage, which means you're going to put this up for bid, any card from your hand, but this is probably the one. And then whatever the next card up for bid was going to be, you just take. So you do a little switcheroo there with your technology. You can only do that once each round, but that can be a big deal, especially if you know there's only one card that's a real dud in this mix. Maybe you don't want the cheap hero, but if you end up with either of these cards, you know that the odds are pretty good you're going to get something better with your technology advantage.
Yeah.
And now people are bidding on this card that they have good suspicions is not going to be a very good card. So and maybe you're like, all right, well, I have 2 shields, I'll put a shield up there. I mean, that does happen, but not very often. So.
Or in this case,
Yeah.
you 2 projectile weapons. Maybe put up one another projectile weapon.
Yeah, you're like, oh, I don't need this.
So I've actually got some thoughts about this. If you guys don't mind, let me go first, because I think that it's this element that we're talking about right here. I think that gives them sort of the rebound that we need. So there was a game that we had played in fairly recently where my ally was the Ixians, and essentially what the technology can do, especially when you ally, is because normally you're right. Like if you're by yourself, you're probably going to put like one of these 2, back into the folly. But let's say, for the sake of argument, let's say my ally got this. Let's say that I decided I wanted to put this on top, and then let's say they got let's say I got this, or no, better yet, I got this, and then I technology and I put this back. Let's say that I end up getting this or something, and then I tell my ally, like, hey, you're going to want to look at this card, because this card might be very, very useful for you. So they can bid on it, they can get it, especially if you're dealing with a economy faction. And then if they end up with one of these 2 cards, let's say the cheap hero or the worthless card, well, then they pitch it, and then now, abracadabra, boom. Now they've got a hand that's actually set up really, really well.
Yeah, and that's
the other thing
that's the ally advantage. So if you're allied to the Ixians and you purchase a treachery card, you can discard it. You get to see what it is, but you can immediately discard that card and just take the top one off the deck. And that card that's on the deck is very likely a card that the Ixians and maybe even with your help, because they could say, well, what card should we put on the top of the deck so that we know you'll get it if you decide that whatever you buy is not something you want.
Right.
So that we know. So that makes them a very attractive ally, especially for somebody who's got room in their hands to buy some cards.
The most important part though is you and your ally always get one unknown card per turn that Atreides does not know you have, which is so powerful against Atreides.
Yeah, absolutely.
The,
That is very true.
it
There's
if
also no, go ahead, go ahead.
which and also like the fact you can top deck a card, as in you look at the hand and you put like let's say you put the Krama on top. If there's an Harkonnen in the game, you know Harkonnen got that card. Because on average, it is very unlikely that a Harkonnen player will ever buy more than 2 cards a turn. So if you put a card on top, you know every card in the game, effectively. Because you see the initial setup, which includes the Harkonnen initial territory. People sometimes forget that. Or like I don't know if it's ever written anywhere, but so you know all the cards in the game from setup, and if you top deck a card and are counted by only 1 card on turn 1, you know everything. You don't know where they are, or you don't have like the power to like uh, uh, bury all the shields like you suggested earlier, but just the power knowing that the only shield in the game is with Arcana, right? You can go to him like, hey, if we ally, right? I have information. Or you can be really crazy and hear me out. Just if you see a Kurama, give it to the Arcana player and he'll be nice to you. Top deck it and just say to the Arcana, hey, that one, I'm putting that if you're playing advanced. I put this one on top for you. Be happy and just don't use it against me, right? That's all I ask. Don't use it against me.
I like to make that kind of thing binding personally, but at the end of the day, the Ixian player is right up there with the Atreides in terms of Heart Karama magnets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say one last thing, and then I'll cede the floor. So the Karama is actually super, super, super powerful in my opinion in the Ixian's hand. I know Jack had kind of mentioned before they're kind of once per game Karama, but let me kind of give you an example. So like let's say you go into the bidding phase with this, right? So let's say that you have say 12 spice going into the bidding phase between fights and collections and stuff. So it's turn 2. So typically what a lot of people will do is they will either use this right away. And what I think you need to do is I think you need to wait and just buy a third card. Let me show you what I mean. So like, let's say for the sake of argument, let's flip all these over. And let's say I technology this one, for example. And then let's group them together. And let's shuffle them up. Okay. So let's say for the sake of argument, this is the card that's up for bid. And let's say that you get it for, I don't know, let's say 4 spice or something. All right, so you pay 4 spice, you get the card. Let's see what we got. Hey, that's pretty cool. So another card comes up. What I would recommend is I would use the Karama card to get the second card in the purchase. So now all of a sudden you got this bad boy, okay? And then once you see what this is, you can Ixian technology basically swap this one out and then get the very next one. Now it could be a cheap arrow, but look at this. I've got 3 projectile weapons in my hand. So now I know that the only other weapon that was out in rotation is a poison weapon. So I don't have the defense for the poison weapon, but nobody has the defense against me. So holding on to those Karamas, using some spice and just kind of being patient, I think will let you look at more cards and it will give you an opportunity to dig further into the stack of cards that you know has some good stuff there. Now, obviously, you don't want to do it if it's a bunch of worthless cards because there's not a lot of stuff in the pool that's necessarily worth your time. But in this case, it worked out beautifully because we've got 3 weapons, which means that we're probably eventually going to lose some fights, but it's not going to break our back because we still have a lot of really strong cards in our hand, and we know nobody has a defense against it. So it's a combination of that at start ability of picking, getting your pick of the litter and then suppressing the cards that are bad for you that really kind of make these guys like really, really they're kind of like Harkonnen in that aspect. I think we've kind of made the comparison a few times, but they really kind of live and die in the bidding phase because once you get this set up, you can be really difficult to deal with.
Yeah, but the thing you have to realize, Mr. Nobody, you are taking big chances. Like, let's say you take the projectile weapon. You can only bury one shield a turn, right? So the odds of there being like three shields in a row of six is can be surprisingly large. Like, especially if you also got like stuff like Wailing Way. Uh, so what usually happens when you're playing Ixians for the first 1, 2, 3 turn, you have complete control, as in you know your weapon, there's no defenses for it. Or maybe maybe the Harkonnen have two unknown cards you don't know about. Or maybe hey, only four people bought a card during the turn that it was one shield, so the other two can't have a shield. Which, but that's only for a few rounds. At some point, you're going to run into a situation where the deck just sucks. You picked a projectile weapon initially, and turn 4, 3 shields. Well, now everybody's gonna get a shield. So like, there's a timer on this.
Yeah, it's that. Just like with anything in Dune, you're subject to the randomness of the deck, and will the stars align for you? But this setup here of the starting, having the card knowledge about all the starting cards and choosing the best one out of that mix, plus some level of suppression, tends to give the Ixians a reputation as being very strong early in the game, and if they're going to win the game, it's often in the first couple of turns when it's going to happen. That's when they've got the knowledge and the power and capability. Storm Order will play a factor into it, so if that doesn't work out for them, then they might be stymied. They could be blocked from getting into strongholds or who knows what. But yeah, the odds are pretty good for them. And then if they go for it and they don't win and they've lost their best cards or whatever, catching up is going to be a challenge. But it's going to be about trying to manipulate this deck as much as they can, trying to get back to a point of having some spice so that you can take advantage of your technology advantage and what knowledge you have through suppression, and maybe trying to get a nexus so that you can get a good ally, maybe an economic faction that can help you get back on your feet or get your forces out of the tanks, who can take advantage of your alliance perks as incentive to help pay for the things that you need to get back in. But let's look at the next part of their advantages, and that has to do with cyborgs and suboids. So on the surface, they've got the 7 double strength forces. So 7 forces that in basic are just worth 2 in battle. In advanced, they need the spice to count as 2, but they do have their full 1 strength, and so leveraging that, figuring out where to bring in cyborgs and with suboids. But the suboids have a little sneaky thing that they get to do as well. So they're only half strength in battle, so they're not really helping out a lot there for your strength in your dial, but they do let you sacrifice your cyborgs a little more recklessly than other factions can, because if you do win the battle and you have 1 or more suboids that were not dialed and they have survived, they can go to the tanks in lieu of cyborgs that would have been lost. So you've dialed up your 2 cyborgs so that you've got 4 strength, and your 2 suboids have survived, and you say, you know what, I'm going to send the suboids to the tanks, and the cyborgs get to stay in the territory. And so a lot of times, if you had all these forces in there, if you're another faction, you're with that kind of a dial, you're probably looking at, I've got one one force left over, and that's not very strong. If you're not winning the game right now, this is trouble. But for the Ixians, if they're like, well, only have 2 tokens left over, but that's potentially 4 strength right there. It's not very expensive for them to add a significant amount of force on a subsequent turn, shipping down maybe a couple, another cyborg, a couple of suboids. So they've got that going for them, and as long as they've can start getting those forces back out of the tanks after a loss, hopefully what they're getting out are just the suboids. So they get 1 for free. It's going to be 2 spice per suboid after that, and it's 3 spice if they want to get another cyborg out. But this is a pretty handy battle advantage. It's not, I don't think it's grossly overpowered, but it is a nice cushion for them to be able to dial a little bit higher on average than other factions typically can, and then still have more strength left over than another faction does on average. So let's talk a little bit about the effectiveness of this and the best strategies. Do you always all right, I'm always shipping a pair of these? Because it's also important to note that the cyborgs have 2 movement. They can go 2 territories when they move if they don't have ornithopters. Suboids on their own can only go 1, but if you're in a mix, basically this cyborg is like, jump on, I'm going to carry you. So I'm going to carry you 2 territories. So I think it's good to always have both forces in a territory. But yeah, let's hear from the experts. What do you guys think?
Yeah, the ability for sides to tank losses is, I think, really important because, like as I said, like the Ixians, they're a pretty fragile faction. They're either doing really well or they're not doing well at all. They're doing horrible. And the minute you kind of become irrelevant as the Ixians, you lose a lot of strength that you can never really get back. You've always got to be in a position to, win at any turn, in a position where you could win a fight against most of the factions. And if you fall behind, like again, you lose a lot of strength and also a lot of alliance marketability, I guess is a good way to what those cards are. Having a good hand and being poised for a win is important as Ixians to get a good ally.
Yep, it's basically the cyborg ability is a really big money saver for the Ixians. It isn't really a combat ability in that sense. It just saves them a lot of money in combat because a faction like Joe, for example, or just let's just say Atreides, in order to have a combat somewhere, let's say they want to have a 6 strength combat in Siege to Bar, they have to send the forces there for 6 spice, and I'm talking in advanced, they would have to dial those forces. So another 6 spice, total of 12 spice to have a 6 strength force in Siege to Bar. The Ixians, if let's assume they already have cyborgs. So let's just assume they already have cyborg there. They can do it by only shipping down 3 and then dialing 3. So they save half their spice, and then they also save half the spice reviving because only 3 subyards die. So for Atreides, who needs 12 spice to dial to send the forces there, dial them, and then another 12 spice to revive them from Talaxi tanks. For the cyborgs, it's half, assuming you never lose a cyborg in battle. If you're only losing subways.
Yeah, that's the ticket. Go ahead, GJ.
I think like resilience is their biggest strength. Like they can tank a lot more than most other factions as well. Knowing that they can still hold a stronghold with 3-2 cyborgs after they fought with those same troops is really, really powerful. Paired with the card knowledge they have, they can really just say, well, I'm here and I'm here to stay. I'm not going away. Cyborgs are cheap. They only have 1 free revival, if I recall correctly.
Correct.
Yeah, they do. But cyborgs are not any more expensive. Cyborgs do cost 3 instead of 2, which is something people should keep in mind. But just the ability to be able to fight twice, at least twice, in a stronghold with the same stack of troops on 2 subsequent turns, or even just one, just by saving your cyborgs and sacrificing cyborgs is really, really strong. It makes the HMS a lot more well defended than it would be otherwise, because you can still afford one fight there. Generally
The,
speaking, you
the,
can still
the,
afford
only,
to dial these, and you
the
still
only
have
thing
6 strength, which is no.
the only thing to note about ability, it's a win more ability.
Yes,
Because
exactly.
you need to win the battle for your cyborgs to
Yes,
for your subunits to count as your cyborgs, because if you lose the battle, they're just
everything
all
gone.
gone.
Yeah,
So
it's an ability that
uh,
gives you the extra edge if you are already a little bit far ahead. It
and the
helps to
difference.
alleviate like issues, but it doesn't help you to win more effect. It doesn't help you to get to that position. You need to be there already.
And
This
one of the
doesn't
things. Oh, sorry.
go
And one
go
of the
ahead,
things.
Mouse. Go ahead.
And another thing to note with just the way combat works, the difference between having 3 cyborgs in a stronghold and just 2 is massive.
Mhm.
Being able to dial 6 versus being able to dial 4 is big.
Yep.
Let's go ahead, Mr. Nobody.
Yeah, so one thing, it hasn't actually come up before, and I've only seen this a couple times, and I think it's just because of the way that the HMS ends up working, zipping around getting spiced. But there have been a lot of games that I've been in where multiple factions will come and basically try to grab like one of these spice blows. So the advantage that it has is it means that like if you have the funds, you can send, this over to Carthag, walk over here. And what it means is that when you dial your forces, so if you end up fighting 2 different factions, you can dial your forces in a way that, let's say you do one of your 5 strength leader and then 2 cyborgs. And you're like, okay, well, 2 suboids die. You still have 6 power plus somebody to basically be a sacrificial lamb, which means that you could technically dial 4, which unfortunately would kill a cyborg, but then another suboid goes away. So you've lost 4 forces, had 2 battles, and had the advantage of having 10 power in the exact same area, and you still got guys left over to collect spice.
Yeah, and two cyborgs are going to collect 6 spice, because
Mhm.
cyborgs they collect as if they had carryalls. So it says carry spice, which is, I guess they're they're picking it up and carrying
They're
it physically over there. But that's what that means. Their collection rate is better. So yeah, that's a great point. And it's, you want to, they're not an economy faction, but if they've got spice, they are really effective. And so as the Ixians, you should be going after spice. Yeah, because at the minimum, you're denying somebody else getting it. But best case is that, yeah, if I just have these 2 here and I'm getting 6 spice, 6 spice is pretty good. It's,
Yeah.
3 times better than Chome Charity. So it's
They,
And
I would say,
even if you dial out, right? Let's say even if you lose the third fight, right? Uh, within 2 turns, even if your HMS is over here, right? Within 2 turns, you can be here, right?
right.
You can just try
If
again next turn, and then the third turn it's yours.
Yeah, so if the Freeman and the Emperor represent like raw power, like with their star forces, the Emperor from, his paid ability, the fact that he has a 5 star to card, and the Freeman in advance with the Fatakin and the fact that they don't have to spy style. The Ixians to me just represent like maximum efficiency. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
you can take risk and you can put stacks like that in certain areas. And then once you decide, how many cyborgs you're going to commit, it's basically no risk to them unless like you lose the fight completely. So you're either going to lose no cyborgs if you don't want to, or all cyborgs, if you run into like a trader, or maybe they had the one Achilles card that you were hoping they didn't have or something like that. But yeah, they're just very efficient. Like everything they do is just like these little tiny efficiencies that kind of give them these little advantages that kind of build up over time.
yeah, and that's really the key to leveraging the Ixians effectively to win. It's understanding that that economy of savings and the best way to employ the advantages that they have. And so once that clicks in your head, you become an even more dangerous Ixian player, even if the game goes longer. So yeah, I think that's really the key to grokking how they work. We've talked a lot about the hidden mobile stronghold. This just talks about where it gets placed and how it moves. And so yeah, it can move territories. It does need to be in the territory and sector with the spice in order to collect that spice. But if you've got a situation where you've got spice in multiple territories, and so let's say that they're here and they're going to go 1, 2, 3. Yeah, they're collecting spice from both of those territories, and it depends on how many forces in there. It would be whatever their collection here. But if you've got 3 cyborgs and 3 suboids, you're collecting all of the spice in a territory. That's there's no question. You don't have to do the math. You're getting it all, and maybe with like if this is doubled by the harvester or whatever. And this over here, maybe 24 spice. That might be a tall order, but still, all things being equal, yeah. If the other factions have foolishly left spice out there, you should be able to collect that. Yeah, and it's worded a little bit in a hinky way. That we had a player who was like, well, it says just be in the sector. So like, well, I'm in the sector. Do I get it? And no, you need to be in the territory and sector.
So I'll be honest, when I first got the expansion, I thought it worked that way. So for example, there was a game where it was like this, and then I think it was like that, and then like something like that. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll just like go here, and then that just vacuum sucks that up. And then I'll just scooch over here, and then get this one, and then I'm like, all right, well, I'll just hang out here, and wherever it pops up, I'll just point my little nose at it, and I'll just vacuum it up. And I was like, I don't think that's the way it works. And I read it, and I was like, I don't know. And then I think it wasn't until like I finally hopped online, and guys were like, yeah, it definitely does not work like that. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, well,
That
I
was
owe everybody that I played with an apology.
quality control issue. So that's
Yeah.
that's partially on us. We talked about the alliance advantage in the technology one we've covered as well, and the suboid strength. It's not really an advantage, but it is more of a clarification. But if you're playing advanced, and your forces count half the strength unless they have spice for them, but you don't have to do that with the suboids. They're always half strength, and that also means you can't say, well, I'm going to spend spice to make them full strength. No, they're always half strength. There's nothing you can do, but at least you don't have to spend. They're not going to be a quarter strength. So that's the full spectrum of advantages on here. We could talk about the Ix homeworld. If you want to drag that out in there, just to kind
I'm
of.
not sure if we mentioned this already, but the advanced Karama ability, I think we talked about it. I don't think
Yeah,
we actually
and
said what it
let's
does.
definitely explain what it does. Once per game, playing a Karama, it lets you move the stronghold during the shipping and movement phase. So you may have already moved it that turn in the storm before the storm moved, but you would be able to move it again in shipping and movement. And this does not count as your movement action. So you're like, I'm moving it, and now I'm shipping, and now I'm also moving. So yeah, that moving this stronghold. It's partially to say, look, I'm not feeling safe here. There's business going on, so I'm going to move it. But the real reason is you're getting the spice that just showed up that turn, and the spice blows, and denying everybody that spice. So it's a great windfall using that once per game Karama effect. So we've got the Ix, the planet, the 9th planet of that system. That's how it got its name. And at one point they forgot. They're like, why is it called Ix? But yes, at high threshold. So this is as long as they've got 5 or more of their forces on their homeworld. If they pay to revive a suborg, they get 2 suboids for free. That's above and beyond any kind of limit. So if they've got a bunch, let's say they've got a bunch of guys in the tanks, and like, well, my free revival, I'm getting a suboid out, and I'm going to spend 3 spice to get another one out. and I get 2 suboids out as part of that purchase. So 3 spice, getting them 4 forces that turn, pretty good. So this helps out. And and then it bolsters your reserves because that's exactly where they go. Once they're at low threshold, if they get down to there's nobody on the planet or only up to 4 forces, they don't get to move the hidden mobile stronghold. So that can be a bit of a blow, but hopefully they're at this low threshold because they're going for it and they're going to try to win. Now, if somebody else,
And most importantly, they can free revive an extra cyborg.
it's true.
You know,
And one extra free
2 cyborgs
revival.
out.
So that's softening the mitigating the issues. But if somebody occupies Ix, then they take control of the bidding advantage. That means that they get to look at the cards and not you. They're looking at the cards that are going to be up for that auction. 1 extra. They're deciding which card gets suppressed, top deck, bottom deck, and then they're shuffled up. And so that is a pretty compelling reason for Ix to make sure nobody takes control of their planet. So the stakes are pretty
I would
good.
never do such a thing.
Yeah, it's too. You're like, we know where everything is. We know how this planet. When we look at this planet, it's clearly, it's got Bluetooth and smart TVs, and nobody knows how everything is configured. It would just be a bad idea to try to occupy it. And they also would get a 2 spice income from the spice bank for occupying Ix. So it's a very juicy target. If the Ixians are careless about controlling their planet, it makes a pretty good target for somebody to come in there and say, maybe this could help us out. So yeah, that covers everything that the Ixians do, and we can talk about the Nexus card as well. You can prevent Ixians from either using their bidding advantages or technology. So if you've got this Nexus card and the Ixians are in the game and you are not them, the betrayal is the effect. If you are the Ixians and you've got this, your cunning effect is before formulating your battle plan, you may count all of your suboids in all battles this turn, counting full strength without needing spice. So that can be a very big deal in advanced. And of course, if the Ixians are not in the game and you get this, you're essentially getting their alliance advantage. You may discard a treachery card you just purchased and then take the top card of the deck. So this is a nice little failsafe for, I can't believe I bid 6 spice to get a ballast set. Hopefully I'm getting something better by playing this card and getting rid of that treachery card. So I do like this Nexus card top to bottom. I think this is all pretty interesting effects.
Yeah, the Ixians are one of the factions that are most changed by their own vulnerability, because effectively the high threshold for just paying 9 spice, you can get 9 subunits back basically.
It's incredible. It's a really powerful tool to just lets you go in more frequently. If you can win, it's again a win more thing, right? If you have the spice, you can just afford to be so much more reckless.
I
Effectively,
play Laxu, and it's actually a very different Ixian because now you can afford to. You spend 3 spice, and every turn you get 3 cyborgs and 4 suboids back for only 3 spice. Insane.
It's incredible. It's really good.
Yeah, of course there are some weird rules. For example, the advanced grammar can't be used if you're on low threshold, which that's just weird.
Obvious.
Well, that's
You
not
cannot move
that
it.
obvious, but
You cannot move it, so yeah, even the advanced karama doesn't work. But the occupy part is something Dex should be really careful about because
and
the winning advantage is big.
And the high threshold ability doesn't work on like the Emperor Alliance ability, where you
right, because you have to be the purchaser of your own cyborgs.
You have to pay.
Yeah. Although the Emperor can just give you the money and go hog wild. So it's not terrible, but it's not as good as
you don't get to revive like 6 cyborgs and get like 12 subjects packed with that basically.
Sadly not. No. But let's also not forget that being cyborgs not having like the revival limit per turn. Anything that gives you extra revivals is incredible. recruits, Golas, the Emperor's Alliance ability, this, anything that literally allows you to revive more troops for free,
Mhm.
just is a godsend for X. They just want more and more of that stuff because they
And listen,
thrive
just
on having these troops. Subways are kind of terrible. They just tank hits. These are the real fighting force.
And just for visual aid to kind of piggyback off of what you're saying, what everything that I just put in the HMS is the maximum amount of forces you can have and still be at high threshold. So it's like you can have a substantial amount of your forces on the board or in the tanks,
Yeah.
and you're still not going to flip. So don't be timid trying to get down on the planet to get busy. Obviously you need to be mindful, but don't don't sort of live in fear. You know what I mean? This
Yeah.
is a
Don't sit
quite a
around.
powerful force. Yeah, yeah.
I think homeworks really make X go from the let's be careful and really plan ahead super carefully with all the cards and be precise and technical to, well, I guess I can afford to lose a little more. I
Mhm.
can just go in, I can ship one or two more. It's fine, it's going to be fine. And I think that's really, really interesting for a faction that is so dynamic and so powerful early on. Makes them so much more have a longer lifespan effectively. They don't fall off
Which
as hard after turn 4, which is
which
really
is what the
good.
homeworld generally do, right?
Yeah.
If you ever play with a homeworld, you notice that people leave more forces behind in their reserves to remain on high threshold, which means that fights are generally more balanced, or at
Mhm.
least games tend to take longer. Some people enjoy it. Other people don't. They want to short, quick games, explosive. Get me that surprise poison blade turn 2, killing Fate Alpha. But others like no, no. I've done the math for 4 turns in a row, 5 turns in a row. I realized that after Caval accumulation, only the guild could still have the poison blades as an unknown card in their hand. I know nobody else can have it, so now I know that I can win turn 5. There are two kinds of Dune player basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that is the Ixian faction. It'll get everybody if they want to have a final word on it. But we've hit an hour, which is I think about as much as anyone can stand. And I know that's not true. There's some people who are like, I wish this were 4 hours long, but that's not a lot of people, and there may not be help for you. But yeah, let's start with you, Mr. Nobody. Any last bits of insight or wisdom or characterization about the Ixians that you want to impart upon our viewers?
Yeah, I would say that they're sort of a razor's edge efficiency faction. I would say that the more games that you play with them in particular, the more comfortable and sort of instinctual you'll become about what cards you need to keep, what cards you want to suppress, what cards you want to put on top. Um, I would not necessarily shy away from them. If you're just kind of getting your feet wet into the game, I think they'll let you see a lot of the cards that are kind of out in the pool. And even if you make bad decisions or you don't win a lot, it'll kind of expose you to more information. And yeah, they're really fun. I know some people kind of say if you're not winning, by turn 1 or turn 2, you're doing it wrong. I don't necessarily subscribe to that because I've definitely been in games where Ixians have gone the distance and they've won turn 7 or 8. So it's very much possible. But yeah, just have fun and choose the cards wisely.
Yeah, they practically won on turn 4 just this week in a game that we played, but they had the rug pulled out from
Well,
under them.
Yeah,
I mean,
someone had other plans, so let's put it that way.
Yeah, Bene Gesserit.
technically,
So yes, Jaded. What are your last thoughts on the Ixians, if you have any?
ooh, the Ixians, I feel like we haven't like really clearly said this, but if you want to be an IRL mentat, and if you got like mnemonic techniques and you can hold a lot of things in your head and remember who's got what and what was sold when, this is the faction for you, hands down. Just the ability to, if you can thing, you theoretically should have no excuse on losing.
Yeah, they're a faction when you are not the Ixians, you want to pay close attention to what they're doing. Where are they putting their HMS? How, are they bidding on cards in the bidding phase, and how high are they willing to bid. There's always a little bit of a mind game with the tradies when they're controlling that auction, driving up the bid. Are they driving it up just to mess with you and get you to overpay for a terrible card, or is it because they're like, I really need to be the one who gets this card, and trying to read the person who's doing that. But with Ixians, there's a little bit of that as well. They don't know what the card is, and if you're playing advanced, they do have that technology as they're out for maybe not getting a good card. But if they're bidding on everything up there, then you're like, well, then there's probably a lot of good cards in this auction. But if they're passing, and you're like, they probably just loaded this whole thing up with garbage. There's maybe one good card, but maybe it's Thumper, who knows? And so they, and when I'm the Ixians, I'm trying to either that's a hot auction or it's a cold one. It just depends on what I draw and what I can get out of circulation. But yeah, you want to pay attention to what they're doing. Melister, what are your last thoughts on the Ixians?
Well, the actions they always bid on cards, so you can't really read them because of the in advance at least. Their technology, it gives them so much more advantage in buying trash that I see action player bid on cards, even if it's just all 6 worthless and 1 true trends, So can't really read into them. So
Yeah, they might get a
but
future technology card. I'm like, well, all right, didn't work this time, but
next time.
it'll work next time.
But my
Yeah,
major
just
my major advice I want to give to people: always pick the weapon in the setup as the actions.
Yeah,
Doesn't matter if there's one defense in the setup that counters your weapon. Always pick the weapon. There's still 1 in 5 chance you go up against the enemy that didn't have your defense.
yep.
one last thing. Do not bid on the last card. Bid on any other card before the last card, because if you get the last card, you can't Ixian technology. So be mindful of that.
Yep. GJ, what do you got for us? Last words, final last words.
I want to end the same way I started, and I want to say that decks are weird. They can be extremely flashy, they can play the long game, they can be unpredictable, they can be extremely predictable, they can be strong, they can be weak. It's literally just up to you. They are extremely fun to play, but they also require, if you want to play them at the best, you really have to play them. You really have to put so much effort and attention into everything you do, every single decision you make, and really swing the game one way or the other. Even just something like the starting card, or what card you want to suppress. Do you want to put it on top or bottom? Even just that simple thing can have so many consequences that you maybe didn't think about, and they are going to bite you. They're fun though. They are definitely one of the weirder factions because they start on the planet with a stronghold already. No one else does it unless it's like a city, but no one can ship into the HMS. You have unique control over spies, you have unique control over the cards, you have just a ton of tools to stay in the game, and if you play them well, you are going to have a lot of fun.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody for participating in this episode of Battle Language, and let us know in the comments, what do you think about the Ixians if you've had a chance to play with them, your impressions if you haven't had the pleasure, and what sorts of success you've had playing them or playing against them, and any questions you have about any of the advantages or whatnot. Let us know, and we will try to answer those as quick as we can. That is it for this episode. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.